Welcome to Outlier on Air. This show is dedicated to disruptors, rule breakers, and big thinkers. I'm your host, Melinda Yeaman. I'm happy to be with you. Hang out with us, and you are going to learn from the best of those who have gone before, and they're here to teach you what they know to help move you forward in your business. We have a very unique guest on the show today who has quite a tragic yet inspiring story. This is a man who has displayed amazing resilience and is sharing his intensely personal story to spread hope to others all over the world. Jeff Olsen is a talented mentor, consultant, speaker, and author. This past weekend, Jeff visited St. George, Utah, where we're located, to make an appearance for his book launch. We invited him out to the Outlier Labs, our co-working space, to do an in-person interview with us. I'm going to share that interview with you today. Just to tell you a little bit about Jeff, in 1997, Jeff experienced a horrific automobile accident which inflicted multiple life-threatening injuries, including crushing both his legs. His left leg was amputated above the knee. The most devastating outcome of the accident was the loss of his wife and youngest son, both killed instantly. At that time, Jeff had a profound near-death experience which deepened his spirituality and gave him insights and gifts not common in today's world. Having that glimpse into the hereafter gave him the courage he deserved to carry on and care for his living son. He has since remarried and adopted 2 more boys. He has 2 books out now. The first is called I Knew Their Hearts, and his new book is called Beyond Mile Marker 80. And now let's hear from Jeff Olsen himself. Hi, welcome to the Outlier Labs. Today we are so excited. We have author and speaker Jeff Olsen with us, and he was kind enough to haul out this time in his schedule. We have just a little bit of time to interview you about your new book, and Jeff is here to partly to launch his book, and it's launching everywhere, but we are happy to have him here in St. George for a couple of days. And as we're a destination community, so we're lucky to have some people come through. And so we like to bring you to the labs and meet you in person and show our audience who you are and hear your story. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I would love to know a little bit more about you. Tell me a little bit more about your past. You have an amazing story, and we'll dig into that. But tell me, just give me in a nutshell what brought you to where you are today.
Sure. Well, I'm a Utah native. And by day, I'm a marketing guy. I'm a creative director at an ad agency, and that's what I do. Life circumstances brought me to authoring a book, which I had no intentions of ever being a writer or authoring a book, and the book took off, which has led into a speaking career and lecturing, and then now book 2 is launching. So it's been a little bit of a whirlwind trip where I still hold down my day job and do 50, 60 hours, in a very demanding creative director role, but then by night I write, and by weekends I lecture. So
wow. Okay, so marketing, we're kindred spirits there. I've been in marketing as well, and started in the creative space, and so we'll connect here. This will be fun. But so I want to talk a little bit more about your personal journey, which is what inspired your first and your second book. You're launching your second book tomorrow, from what I understand. So if you wouldn't mind, tell me about the events that led up to the first book.
Well, the first book, the pinnacle was 16 years ago. I was in an awful automobile accident. It crushed both my legs. In fact, I lost the left leg above the knee, was amputated. My back was broken. My rib cage was crushed. My right arm was just about torn off, and then the seatbelt came through me and ruptured all my insides. It was horrific. But the most devastating part is that my wife and youngest son were killed instantly in the accident. So me and my oldest son survived. I was an absolute wreck. I spent almost 6 months in the hospital, 3 months in ICU, 18 surgeries as they put me back together. My son was actually okay. He broke his wrist and banged up his ribs. I mean, okay physically. The emotional trauma of losing half the family and nearly being orphaned was quite an ordeal in and of itself, but I had some very profound spiritual out-of-body experiences during that time that I really didn't share with anybody. I didn't talk about it. I had shared them with my brothers and very close family members, but they were very personal. And as life moved on, miracles happened. I healed, I came back home, I got back to work. I eventually remarried. We adopted 2 little boys, and life was moving on in a profound way. But there was still this nagging about all that I had experienced and how and if to share it. And eventually a publisher approached me and said, "You've got to do a book." And I'm really not a writer, except now I am. But I shared the experience, and it was actually quite a profound thing. I was reluctant to do it. I didn't have confidence in writing. The story was very personal, and I ended up coming back down here to St. George. That's why we're launching beyond mile marker 80 here. Mile marker 80, which is about 2 hours out of town near Parowan, is where the accident happened. And I came back to the scene of the accident to really kind of ask. Ask the universe, am I supposed to do this? Is this what I'm meant to do and share these things? And I got a profound answer that yes, I was. In fact, it's funny, I call it the voice that speaks to my heart. And it's, I don't hear it in my ears, I hear it right here, but I can quote what I was told, and I was told, share your experience. And if you do, people will heal, and they'll get their own answers to whatever they're dealing with in their own life. So we moved forward and wrote the book. And the first book, I Knew Their Hearts, which is a funny story. The initial title was Mile Marker 80. That's what I was calling it. So it was
the first book.
Yeah, it was submitted as Mile Marker 80 in the manuscript, and about a month before the release, it was through copy editing and everything. The president of the publishing company called me and said, "Where'd you get the title of your book?" And I said, "Oh, it's a beautiful story. I went back to the scene of the accident. Mile Marker 80 is where it happened. I had the profound answer that I should write the book, and that's why you have the manuscript, and that's why it's called Mile Marker 80." And he said, that is a beautiful story. He said, "However, Stephen King just launched Mile Marker 81." So he said, I don't think we can do this on the heels of that. So we changed the title to I Knew Their Hearts, which is based on many of the out-of-body experiences I had in encountering people and literally seeing them for who they really are in their heart. Not about, I went out of the body. I had a profound encounter with strangers, really, nurses, doctors, patients in the hospital, but I knew them perfectly. I knew everything about them, and I had this profound love for them, which really changed my life.
So of course, I don't want to skip over that part of it. Would you mind telling us in consecutive order what happened in that out-of-body experience?
Oh, sure. Okay.
Thank you for sharing that.
No, that's fine. And at the scene of the accident, as it was, and it was mayhem. The first thing I consciously heard was my son crying in the back seat.
And how old was he? 7?
He was 7.
Okay.
And as a father, I was relieved because I knew he was okay. Oh, good, he's okay. He was crying, he was hurt. And I wanted to get to him. Now, I couldn't move. That's when I realized I couldn't move. I was pinned under the steering column, either on the seat or the floor. I couldn't tell. I couldn't see. What I didn't realize then is all the injuries. Both legs crushed, all the extensive injuries. I just wanted to get to my son because there he was crying. And that's when I realized the brutal reality that no one else was crying. I couldn't hear the baby. And I knew in that moment that both my youngest son and my wife were gone, that they had been killed instantly. And it was, there aren't words to describe the devastation of that situation. I'm trapped, one child crying and half the family gone. Right. And I felt myself begin to slip as well. I was losing consciousness, and I was able to talk, and yet I was losing breath because my lungs were collapsing, and I was able to say to my son that it was going to be okay, but I knew that was a lie. I knew it was not okay, and I was slipping into unconsciousness. And as I did so, the strangest thing, I became very, very calm. In the worst mayhem I can imagine of any man or father, I became very, very calm, and I seemed to just rise above the accident. And it was strange. It was almost as if I was surrounded in light or a bubble of protective love or something. It was nearly tangible, And yet as I realized, gosh, I'm okay. You know, with all the mayhem, I'm like, I'm really okay. I realized that my wife, who I knew was deceased at the accident, was there with me. And she was okay too. Except she was emphatic that I couldn't stay. She's like, you have got to go. You've got to go back. You can't be here. And I knew that. I mean, it was a very profound moment, because there I was looking at the woman I loved more than life. And I knew I had a son crying in the back seat of that car that would be orphaned. And I got to make a decision. And I did. And as soon as I made that decision, I actually found myself wandering around the hospital, which was odd. Now, I had no sense of time. I mean, all I knew is I'd been in this strange, beautiful, peaceful, loving bubble, saying the most profound goodbye I could imagine. What I later found out is people arrived on the scene. One of them was a doctor. He had oxygen in a trailer. They were able to do some things to see to me, take care of Spencer. Rushed us to Cedar City. Cedar City knew they could do nothing for me, so life flighted us both to Salt Lake. And I was unaware of any of that. All I knew is I'd risen above the scene. I was saying goodbye to my wife. And then I was wandering around the hospital and encountering the doctors and nurses and patients and families. I mean, anything in a trauma ER hubbub of a setting. And that's when I was really seeing them. I mean, I was encountering them, but gosh, I saw everything. I knew them. I knew their love and their hate and their joy and their pain and their decision and every motivation for every decision. And all of them, from the heroin addict to the saintly grandma, were absolutely beautiful. And I loved them, and they were perfect. In fact, I kept wanting to embrace them. It was like, I wanted to go and literally hug these people that I didn't know from Adam in life, but out of the body like that, we were absolutely connected. In fact, I was feeling that we were literally one, that we were all the same. We were all connected. We were all in this together. And I came from a Christian background and a good Christian home, and even biblically things were coming to my mind as I was experiencing that, verses like, in as least if you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me, and I was seeing that. I was seeing us all as these divine children that were absolutely perfect and beautiful, regardless of our circumstances or choices or what life had done to us or what we had done to life. There was just a connection that was absolutely profound. And then I finally wandered upon a man I didn't feel anything from, which was odd, and so I stepped closer to look and realized in that moment that I was looking at myself, that was my body, and yet I was here. That was just, the flesh suit that I'd been going around in, which was absolutely a mess. My body was not in good shape, but I knew that I had to get back in it.
Wow. That's interesting. That's amazing, to say the least. It's hard to put that into words. And I think we all know there have been other stories similar. In fact, when we first talked, this was really interesting to me because when I was a child, an older child, my best friend's father had a very similar experience in a car accident, and explained some very, very similar feelings and insights, and is alive today and has a rebuilt body and deals with pain every single day and has quite an amazing perspective on life, which I can imagine that gives you. So tell me, obviously this is a very spiritual experience, very tender experience. Has this been the catalyst to reaching out toward people across the world? I mean, this has nothing to do with a certain religion or gospel. Right. This is something that is universal, right? We hear these stories around the world. Have you connected with other people on this level? I
have. In fact, I got an email 2 days ago from a woman in New Zealand who was able to download the new book on Kindle.
Oh, nice.
And anyway, yes, and it has gone around the world. And in sharing it, that's the interesting thing. I mean, when I went back to mile marker 80 and talked and asked, am I to do this, and was told people will heal, they're absolutely healing. I mean, I got a letter from, actually it came in a letterhead of the publisher. Someone had gotten the address of the publisher off the back of the book, but inside the envelope was a little 3x5 card with hen scratch, little teeny tiny writing in pencil on it. And, so I turned it over and realized it was jail mail. It was from an inmate up in Vancouver. And he had gotten a hold of the book somehow, and yet what he had written when I turned it over and got my glasses so I could read the little hen scratch was absolutely beautiful. I mean, it was heartbreaking. Yes, I'm in prison. Yes, I'm guilty. Yes, I did these things. I lost my family too. My life will never be the same. And then he went on to say, but your book changed my life. I know that I'm loved. I know that I can be more. I know when I get out of here, I can make a difference, and I can choose something far greater than I've chosen up to this point. And, and I sit there weeping, thinking, that's the guy. That's the one guy I wrote the book for, and yet there's been hundreds of those, and there is no agenda. I mean, so often people share spiritual things with an agenda, for this or that, or believe me, or I'm right. I don't care if anybody believes me. There's no agenda in it. I was told by what I call God to share my experience. And that's all I've done. And even in writing the book, it was interesting because I would think, I'm going to expound on this. And it's almost like Spirit would just say, no, you're not. Just share your experience and let people draw their own conclusions. And so it has been a pretty widespread and profound thing.
So now you're an author for the second time,
Right.
and being an author is an entrepreneurial venture for sure.
Yeah.
Here you are talking about your book here, you're traveling around, and you have to do a lot of hard work to get your book out there. It's definitely an entrepreneurial venture, and I think it's really interesting to talk about the fact, a lot of people write a book, like you said, for an agenda, maybe to build their business. Maybe it's a good agenda, but to me, the message that I'm getting is, it needs to come from the heart. It needs to be something that you're passionate about, and when it is, then beautiful things happen, and you connect with people across the world, whether it's this type of subject or some other passion that we are trying to share with the world. So obviously, that shows through that this is you. You have really put yourself out there in a very personal way. And like you said, there isn't an agenda with it. It's just to share and let people draw their own conclusions. I admire that.
Yeah, it's been an interesting process because, when I wrote the book, I thought, well, my mom might buy it. I mean, I had no expectation that anybody would buy it.
You just knew you had to write it.
And I knew, yeah, and I did open up. I mean, I basically shared and spilled it out there. And then the interesting thing is, as people would read that, they said, well, what happened? How on earth did you ever remarry? And you've adopted these children. So book number 2, beyond mile marker already.
Yeah,
what
I wanted
happens,
to ask you about.
Yeah, what happened beyond that is, where the first book is kind of the near-death experience, this is more the life experience. I mean, this is about the fact, I got to get up, put on my leg, get my shoes on, and go to work. I got to go make a living. I got to raise a son on my own. I mean, this is about getting on with life. And it's very personal, too, because it wasn't all rainbows and sunshine and flowers. I mean, some people could misconceive and say, well, he had a terrible accident, spiritual experiences, and then he was okay. No, I had a terrible accident and some profound spiritual experiences. But it took 13 years to try to put this back together, and the hole in me from losing half my family was unfillable. I mean,
Sure.
and the guilt and the remorse and the regret that I was driving the car. And even though this beautiful woman had shown up in my life, and I remarried, and we didn't even apply for adoption, and these kids landed in our life. I mean, all these gifts from heaven just flowing in, and yet I was still picking up the pieces. And it took a long time, and there was a lot of guilt and grief and rebuilding. And the second book might be more personal than the first one, because it's things people can relate to,
Sure.
I mean, it's like, gosh, how do you rebuild a family? How do you rebuild a marriage? How do you get through those things? And yet, here again, I had profound dreams. Deceased loved ones would come to me in dreams at the perfect time with the perfect message.
Wow.
And I feel very, very lucky about that, but it's not easy to share because I know a lot of people don't get that, and my own son, book 2, Spencer, my surviving son from the accident, who was my greatest support as a child, he hit adolescence and he's angry. He's like, Dad, you have all these beautiful experiences. I have nothing. I've begged God to have a dream or to see Mom just once, and I don't get anything. And so, how do you make sense of all that? And that's kind of the turmoil, but it's entrepreneurial in the way that you really have to open yourself up and be authentic. And it's not about the money to me. There's money in publishing a book that's successful. There's no doubt about that. But it's about the message. It's about putting the message out there and letting people learn from my experience, and yet everybody has their own.
Right.
That's what I'm finding. Everybody has their own experience, and I think the book's popular because I just happen to share mine in a very open way.
Absolutely. So these books go together. They work in tandem, and I'm excited to read the second one. It just came out, so or it's coming out tomorrow. So I'm excited to read that, and I appreciate you sharing those very personal experiences. I would love to know some of the key. I can't even imagine what conversation would come out of this if we had more time, but tell me some of the key lessons for yourself, or the takeaways, or the things that you have implemented into your life since these experiences have happened.
Awesome. No, that's great. And we haven't even had a chance to talk about some of the really deep things that took place, and I would love to spend more time with you. But if there's a takeaway, number one is that we really are all connected. We really are one in this world, and we're all in this together. And we're here to love each other and take care of each other and support each other and stop judging each other and stop warring and fighting with each other. And then the other one, too, is personal choice. Had a profound experience when I had already moved home, and I was in a wheelchair, and I was trying to raise my son on my own, and I was broken and crying and upset. He had gone to bed. I couldn't even go up the stairs to tuck him in, and I screamed out to God and said, what am I going to do? How am I ever going to do this? He's going to forget his mom. He's not even going to remember. I wasn't looking for any answer. I was just lamenting and sharing my grief. And I don't profess to talk to God every day, but on this occasion, I literally heard a voice. It wasn't something I felt. It wasn't the voice that speaks to my heart. I heard this in my ears. And it only said 2 words. It said, choose joy. And based on my experience, and particularly that little reminder that everything is a choice. We don't get to necessarily choose what happens in life, but we always get to choose how we experience it, how we go through it. Am I going to feel victimized and crawl in a hole, or am I going to look at it and say, what am I learning? And how am I growing? And even though it's painful, how's this going to make me a better person? And then how can I take that and serve others in a way that assists them to be better people? So that's the bottom line, is choosing and realizing that we're really connected. We're no different. We're all in it together.
Yeah, that's interesting. You've had this experience which most of us will not ever go through. Thankfully, in the traumatic way, we don't want to go through those things, but you've also been blessed with some amazing insights and with just some amazing experiences that I think I didn't know you before, but I'm sure have changed you as a person. And so I would think that those are actual blessings that have come from the experience, from you being strong and working through this. And but as you said, we're all connected, and so even though my experiences are nowhere near as traumatic, I could not even pretend that any of my problems are as nearly as traumatic. Since we're all humans and we're all dealing with these our own issues, then I feel like the principles are the same.
Yeah.
Right? And
that's what I've learned, that our experiences are very diverse, but our emotions are absolutely universal. You know what pain feels like. You know what sadness and joy are. Even if your life path is completely different from mine, and even if you're on the other side of the world, as humankind, yes, our experiences are diverse, but our emotions are absolutely universal.
Sure.
there's no difference.
You know, our audience is an entrepreneurial audience. We talk a lot about business. We talk a lot about strategy. We talk about a lot of things that are very brain bending, you know, and so some people might be wondering, well, wow, we're getting so touchy-feely, like what does this have to do with business? Sure. But the truth is that as entrepreneurs, and we sit around and talk about this at Outlier, why are we doing this? Because we all have our own innate desire to live with time freedom, with location freedom. We all have our own desire to kind of set ourselves apart from the norm and do things in our own way and innovate, and so we're outliers in that way. We're doing something different. And so I want to kind of tie that in, because I would like to say that it's not always about business. It's not always about the typical things that we think it's about.
Right.
And you know, we all have a human side, and it's not separate. And that's one thing that I could never really get my arms around in the corporate world was, you know, you go to work and you have your work persona, and then you go home and I have my mom persona, and we're the same person, but I could never talk about certain things at work that I would talk about at home. You know, that's not really me at all. And I found out that's not really a lot of people. We just want to be the same person, and we want to be able to live true to who we are, and we want to be free about what we're talking about. So let's just be honest that we all have problems.
Yeah.
We all have we all have insecurities. We all have times when we're calling out to a greater being, you know, wondering what is going on, trying to put this together. We talk about work-life balance and how difficult that is. So this to me is just us getting real. And from these experiences, I think we really can learn from you. I love your takeaways and the points that you have. And I really do love to connect with our audience and connect with other outliers on that level, because this is a personal journey. It's not just a business journey. We're doing this for personal reasons.
Right.
So I wanted to kind of make that tie-in so that our audience knows where we're coming from.
No, that's beautiful. And I mean, from my personal experience as a marketer, I mean, that's what I do. I have a day job. I get to go to work and do advertising and campaigns, and yet my knowledge that I'm really selling to people after all. You know,
Yeah.
you can talk about target audiences
Right.
and, you know, demographics. And if they don't feel something, then they're never going to affiliate. There's a Buddhist philosophy that you cannot fall in love with someone that wears a mask. And so, and you'll see this too, the whole world's shifting. Corporations and big companies are taking off the mask and getting more authentic, more real. Entrepreneurs are working from their passion. They're doing what they're passionate about, and they're getting more real and authentic about things. The world is shifting, and it's all part of it, and if we can be the same people. My experiences have, you know, catapulted my career in understanding people.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't care what you're selling. Chances are you're probably selling it to people. I haven't sold anything to a computer in 30 years. I've never sold anything to a computer. You know, it's people and our connections that make it all work. And so, yeah, the spiritual touchy-feely things are a part of business, and if we're passionate about that, then it all falls into place.
Yeah, they're part of who we are. So thank you so much for coming. Please let us know how we can, number one, how we can find you and your books.
Awesome. Well, if you're in the St. George area, come to Deseret Book tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'll be signing and launching the book, and I would love to have a whole circus of people there. Otherwise, go to @onenow, ATONENOW, @onenow.com. You can find me there. The books are on Amazon. They're on all the electronic formats, Kindle, Nook. You can get them at Siegel Book, Barnes & Noble, some Costco's, Deseret Book.
Amazon?
Anyway,
Will they be
Amazon. They're on Amazon now. Actually, you can get them today on Amazon.
All right, great. And they are on audio as well, correct?
The first book is on audio.
First book is on
yeah,
audio. I'm a big audio girl. So.
Yes, I sat for 3 days in a studio reading my own book,
right,
which was difficult. And
I'm glad it was you that read it.
But
as
it turned out
good.
really well. So.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you have to go, and I appreciate you sharing this with us.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on Outlier on Air. If you like what we're doing here, please visit our website at outliermagazine.co, where you will find the notes to this interview, all the relevant links, and the links to our 5-day-a-week audio podcast where we interview entrepreneurs from all over the world. We're here to help you start, grow, and scale your business. So join us here again. We've got more great video interviews for you as well. And until then, we'll see you next time.